Greetings, Guardians. This is Olympus Alliance. And today we continue our Talisman series, and this is exactly where players start to separate themselves, because this series is not about picking what looks stronger on paper. It's about understanding how a single change can completely shift the outcome of a fight, sometimes in ways you don't expect. If you've been following the channel, you already know we've covered several heroes who received a second talisman over the last 12 months, heroes like Peach, Folio, Hus, Somna, Aiden, Electra, Polaris, and Burner, and all of those videos are already available if you want to go deeper into them, because everything we are building in this series connects. Now we continue moving forward, faction by faction, and today we stay within the nature faction, breaking things down properly, one hero at a time, because the goal here is not just to give answers. It's to give understanding, and that takes a bit more depth. And before we get into Mojo himself, there is something we always reinforce, because it defines everything that comes next. Whenever we talk about talismans, we always separate the fixed stat from the variable stat, because that second stat is where real optimization happens, that's where your metacubes go, and that's where builds are either made or wasted. Because talismans are different from everything else in your hero. Once you build skins, glyphs and artifacts, they are locked, but talismans are not. Talismans are the only real tool you have to adapt your hero depending on the fight in front of you, and that means they are one of the most powerful systems in the game, if you actually understand how to use them. And today we're looking at Mojo. A hero that sits in a very interesting position in the current meta, especially as part of what many players are starting to recognize as the MAM structure, where magic penetration, pressure and sustained damage become extremely important over time. Mojo is not a burst hero. He is not there to delete targets instantly. He is there to apply pressure, to scale into the fight, and to punish teams that cannot deal with sustained magical damage. And because of that, his talisman choice is not as simple as it might seem. When you look at his first talisman, the Talisman of the Spirits, it immediately pushes you in a very clear direction: intelligence and magic attack. And for Mojo, that combination is incredibly direct, because everything he does scales from magic attack. His damage increases, his healing improves, and his overall presence in the fight becomes more impactful. This is a talisman that doesn't change how Mojo plays. It amplifies what he already does. Now when you look at the second option, the Talisman of Shaman, you start to see a completely different approach. Magic, critical hit chance and armor. And this is where things become more interesting, because now we are not just scaling his base output, we are changing the way that output is delivered. Instead of consistent pressure, you are introducing variability through critical hits, and at the same time giving him a bit more survivability against physical damage. And on paper, both options make sense. One gives you stability, consistency, and stronger scaling across every ability. The other introduces synergy with certain heroes and opens up a different way of building Mojo. But this is where we need to look deeper. Because when you analyze Mojo's skills, one thing becomes very clear. Everything scales with magic attack. Not partially. Not conditionally. Everything. Which means that when you equip the Talisman of the Spirits, you are directly reinforcing his entire kit. Every tick of damage becomes stronger, every interaction becomes more meaningful, and over the course of a fight, that adds up in a very noticeable way. That massive boost in magic attack is not just a stat increase. It is a performance increase. And in most situations, that makes it extremely difficult to ignore. However, this does not make the second talisman irrelevant. Because the Talisman of Shaman introduces something different. It introduces synergy. Mojo does have access to a magical critical hit skin, but on its own, that value is not enough to turn him into a true crit-based threat. The additional critical hit chance from the talisman changes that, and suddenly, Mojo can start interacting differently with certain team compositions. Especially when you bring in heroes like Hus, Polaris or even Miu. Now you are not just dealing damage. You are triggering additional effects. You are amplifying healing interactions. You are increasing overall team effectiveness through critical scaling. And this is where the second talisman starts to make sense. Not as a default option, but as a situational tool. Because if you build around it correctly, Mojo can become part of a different kind of structure, one that relies more on synergy and interaction rather than raw scaling. And this is exactly where talismans become interesting. Because the question is no longer just which is stronger. The question becomes, what am I trying to achieve in this fight? If you want consistency, if you want reliable scaling, if you want Mojo to perform at his highest level across most situations, then the answer is clear. The Talisman of the Spirits provides that value. It aligns perfectly with his kit, it increases everything he does, and it gives you a level of performance that you can rely on. But if you want to explore synergy, if you want to build around crit interactions, if you want to push different combinations with heroes that benefit from those mechanics, then the Talisman of Shaman becomes a very interesting option. And that is the key takeaway here. This is not about one being good, and the other being bad. This is about one being consistent, and the other being conditional. And in most cases, consistency wins. That is why, overall, the Talisman of the Spirits becomes the preferred choice for most players right now. It delivers value in every fight, it reinforces Mojo's strengths, and on top of that, it is available through the Eternal Frontier Merchant, making it a much more accessible investment compared to many alternatives. But again, and this is something we will keep repeating throughout this entire series, there is no single answer that works everywhere. Because the moment the opponent changes, the moment the fight changes, your optimal choice can change as well. And that is exactly what we want you to understand. Not just what to equip, but why you are equipping it. So Guardians, now we turn to you. Do you stick with the magic attack talisman for Mojo in every situation, or have you explored the critical hit setup and found success with it? Have you tested both, and did you notice how differently he performs depending on the choice? Let us know in the comments, because this is how the community grows, through testing, through sharing, and through understanding the game at a deeper level. And also tell us which hero you want us to cover next, because we are still early in the nature faction, and there is a lot more to break down. We're going deeper, we're getting sharper, and step by step, we're building something that gives you a real advantage in every fight you play. Stay tuned, stay sharp. And as always, salute and friendship.